Imagine waking up in a world where temperatures are far below freezing, food is almost impossible to find, and massive glaciers stretch for thousands of miles in every direction. There is no shelter but what you build with your own hands. No warmth but the fire you fight to keep alive. Every day is a battle, against starvation, against predators larger and faster and hungrier than you, against a cold so absolute it can kill a healthy adult in a single night. And yet somehow, a small group of ancient humans survived one of the harshest periods in Earth's history. While woolly mammoths vanished, while cave bears disappeared, while entire species of megafauna, perfectly adapted predators, and even other kinds of humans were wiped from the planet forever, we remain. How did they do it? What secret gave our ancestors the edge to outlast the deadliest ice age our planet has ever known? The answer isn't just about strength or luck or even fire. It's about something stranger, something written into the very architecture of the human mind. And by the end of this story, it may completely change how you see human history and yourself. To understand what our ancestors faced, we need to go back roughly 26,000 years to the peak of what scientists call the last glacial maximum, the coldest, driest, most punishing chapter of the most recent ice age. At its height, ice sheets nearly 2 miles thick buried Canada, Scandinavia, and much of northern Europe. So much of the planet's water was locked into glaciers that sea levels dropped over 400 feet, exposing land bridges between continents that are underwater today. Average global temperatures were roughly 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit colder than today. That might not sound catastrophic until you understand what that meant on the ground. Forests retreated, grasslands turned to frozen steppe. Vast stretches of what is now fertile farmland became a polar desert, swept by winds that could strip the warmth from a human body in minutes. This was the evolutionary dilemma our species faced. Humans are, biologically speaking, a tropical animal. We evolved on the warm savannas of Africa. We have thin skin, sparse body hair, and a metabolism built for heat, not cold. By every reasonable measure, we should not have been able to survive here. And yet across this frozen world, small bands of Homo sapiens did more than survive. They adapted, innovated, and eventually thrived, while other, seemingly better equipped species did not. Before we go further, if stories like this one, about the hidden forces that shaped who we are, pull at something curious in you, consider subscribing to Fiatica Origins. We go deep into the mysteries of our ancient past every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. So let's ask the real question. What did these people actually do, day to day, to stay alive in a world that seemed designed to kill them? The first battlefield was the human body itself. Cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's lethal with terrifying speed. Hypothermia can set in within an hour of prolonged exposure to freezing wind, and frostbite can claim fingers, toes, and noses in far less time than that. So the very first innovation our ancestors needed wasn't fire. It was clothing, and not the simple draped hides you might imagine. Archaeological sites across Ice Age Europe and Siberia have turned up something remarkable. Eyed needles carved from bone and ivory, some dating back over 40,000 years. This tells us something crucial. Our ancestors weren't just wrapping themselves in fur. They were tailoring it, cutting hides to shape, stitching seams tight enough to block wind, layering garments the way modern Arctic explorers do today. Fitted, layered clothing could mean the difference between a body that retained its core heat and one that didn't. In a world this cold, that difference was the difference between life and death. But clothing alone wasn't enough. Shelter mattered just as much. In treeless regions of the Mammoth Steppe, where there was no wood to build with, ancient humans did something almost unthinkable. They built homes out of the bones of giants. At sites like Mazyrik in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones, skulls stacked to form walls, tusks arched overhead like structural beams, the whole frame likely covered with hides to trap warmth inside. Building one of these structures required immense planning. It meant coordinating the labor of many hands, transporting bones that weighed hundreds of pounds each, and understanding structural design well enough to make the shelter stand against brutal wind. This wasn't primitive desperation. This was engineering. And then, of course, there was fire, the great equalizer. Fire didn't just provide warmth. It extended the day, allowed food to be cooked and preserved, kept predators at bay, and gave people something to gather around after the sun disappeared for what could be 16, 18, 20 hours a day in the depths of an ice age winter. But maintaining fire in a landscape with little wood was its own extraordinary challenge. Evidence from sites across the Mammoth Steppes suggests that in the coldest, most barren regions, people burned bone and fat as fuel, a discovery that speaks to just how resourceful and how desperate survival could be. Every layer of clothing, every bone dwelling, every carefully tended flame, these were not lucky accidents. They were solutions, engineered by minds capable of solving problems no human body had evolved to solve on its own. But technology and shelter only solved half the equation. Because in a frozen world with almost nothing green, nothing growing, and no easy calories anywhere, the real question becomes, what did they actually eat? And that question leads us somewhere far stranger than you might expect. With plant life scarce for much of the year, Ice Age humans in the coldest regions became something close to obligate carnivores, surviving overwhelmingly on meat and fat. Isotope analysis of ancient human bones from this period tells a striking story. Some populations were eating diets built almost entirely around large mammals, at ratios more similar to wolves or lions than to modern human hunter-gatherers. This meant one thing above all: to survive, humans had to become extraordinarily skilled hunters of extraordinarily dangerous prey. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, giant deer with antlers spanning 12 feet, herds of bison and horses that could trample a careless hunter in seconds. And here is where something remarkable emerges, not just about tools but about minds. Hunting an animal 10 times your size and 100 times your strength isn't a matter of individual bravery. It's a matter of group coordination, communication, and long-term planning so sophisticated that some researchers argue it may have driven the evolution of human language itself. Consider the spear thrower, or otlatlo, a simple lever that dramatically increases the speed and force of a thrown spear. It's a small piece of carved bone or wood, but it represents something profound, the ability to imagine a problem. I am too weak and too slow to kill this animal safely, and to invent a solution that doesn't exist anywhere in nature. No other species on this frozen steppe was doing that. Not the cave lions, not the giant hyenas, only us. This is a good moment to pause and ask you something. Because here's the real dilemma at the heart of this story. Our ancestors weren't the strongest, fastest, or best adapted species in this landscape. Mammoths had thick fur and reserves of fat built for exactly this climate. Cave bears could hibernate through the worst months entirely. So why do you think it was the fragile, hairless primate that made it through and not them? I'd genuinely love to know what you think. If this question is turning over in your mind the way it did in mine, hit like on this video and drop your theory in the comments below. I read every one, and some of the most interesting ideas on this channel have come directly from this community. Because the truth is, the answer isn't really about the body at all. It's about what happened after the hunt, in the long, dark hours between kills, when survival depended on something even more fragile and even more powerful than muscle or fur. It depended on each other. Anthropologists studying Ice Age sites have found something consistent across cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Evidence of care for the injured, the sick, and the elderly. Skeletal remains showing healed fractures that would have made a person unable to hunt for months, yet they lived. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. Someone carried them. In a world this harsh, individual strength meant almost nothing without a group willing to keep you alive when you couldn't keep yourself alive. This, not spears, not fire, not fur, may have been the single greatest survival technology our species ever developed. The willingness to sacrifice for one another. Deep inside caves across Ice Age Europe, places like Chauvet in Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain, our ancestors left behind something that has puzzled and moved researchers for over a century. Not tools, not weapons, art. Stunning, technically sophisticated paintings of animals, rendered with a command of perspective and movement that wouldn't reappear in human art for tens of thousands of years. Why would a species fighting for its life against starvation and cold spend precious time and resources crawling into dark, dangerous caves to paint? Why carve small ivory figurines, string beads made from shells carried hundreds of miles from any ocean, or bury the dead with elaborate ornaments that serve no practical purpose at all? The answer researchers keep arriving at is this: meaning-making wasn't a luxury for our ancestors. It was a survival strategy in its own right. Art, ritual, and symbolic thinking allowed disparate human groups to recognize each other as allies rather than strangers, to pass down critical survival knowledge across generations, and to build the kind of deep social trust that made large-scale cooperation possible. A shared symbol, a particular style of bead, a particular pattern painted on a tool, could signal from a great distance, this group can be trusted. In a world where a single bad winter could wipe out an entire band, the ability to forge alliances with neighboring groups, to trade, to intermarry, to share hunting grounds during lean years may have been just as vital as any spear. This is where the story of Ice Age survival connects directly to who we are today. The same neural architecture that let our ancestors paint animals on cave walls by torchlight is the same architecture that lets you recognize a friend's face across a crowded room, that lets you feel moved by a piece of music, that lets you trust a stranger enough to build a life alongside them. Our capacity for symbolic thought, for empathy, for culture, it isn't a modern indulgence layered on top of some real primal survival instinct. It was the survival instinct. It's arguably the single greatest reason our species is here at all, while the mammoths, the cave bears, and even other human species like the Neanderthals eventually vanished. The Neanderthals, remember, were in many ways better physically equipped for the cold than we were. Stockier, more muscular, adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to European winters. And yet, current evidence suggests they lived in smaller, more isolated groups, with less evidence of the kind of long-distance trade and large-scale social networks our species built. When the climate grew even harsher, those tighter, more isolated Neanderthal communities may have had far less capacity to draw on outside help. Our ancestors, spread across wider social webs, may have had somewhere to turn. It's a haunting thought that the difference between a species that endured and one that didn't may not have come down to strength, or tools, or even intelligence in the narrow sense, but to something as intangible as how well we cared for one another and how far that caring could reach. So when we return to the question we started with, how did a fragile, hairless, tropical primate survive the deadliest ice age our planet has ever produced? The answer turns out to be almost paradoxical. It wasn't because our ancestors were the strongest creatures on that frozen steppe. It wasn't because they were immune to the cold or naturally suited to scarcity. It was because they were willing to solve problems together, to invent tools no one had seen before, to care for the sick and the injured long after those people stopped being useful, to paint animals on cave walls not for food, but for meaning, to trust strangers across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness because a shared symbol said, "We are the same." Every single one of those traits, cooperation, empathy, symbolic thought, the drive to innovate, every one of them is still inside you right now, reading these words or listening to this voice. You are the direct descendant of the humans who made it through. Not because they were the toughest animals in the room, but because they were, in the truest sense, the most human. The Ice Age eventually ended. The glaciers retreated. The mammoths and the cave bears and the giant deer faded into memory and bone. But the people who huddled around those fires, who stitched those hides, who painted those walls, they didn't just survive. They handed something down, something that outlasted the ice itself. If this journey into humanity's deepest winter left you with something to think about, that's exactly what Fiatica Origins is here for. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. We release new deep dives into the mysteries of our ancient past regularly. And there is so much more of this story still to uncover. And if this particular story moved you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who'd appreciate staring into the fire with us. It helps this channel grow more than you might think, and it helps more curious minds find their way to stories like this one. Thank you for spending this time with me. in the deepest winter our species ever faced. Until next time, stay curious.